Hey gang, Jamie Dreyer with Overhaul Training here. In this video, we're going to take a look at the back squat. We're going to give a movement audit for my cousin Matt. I got a text message this morning from Matt when he was squatting at home, and he wanted my input on his depth and a little bit of knee wiggle that was going on there. So this is a pretty common issue. I figured I'd share it with you guys. So why don't we take a look at that video real quick, eh? Not a bad squat, right? It's pretty typical for what you're going to see a lot of people doing at the gym when they're squatting in a rack on their own. Now, before I answered his question about depth, my follow-up question was, how deep can you squat without a heavy load? Like if you're just on your own, keeping your feet flat, how low can you go? And this is what he sent me in response. Huge difference in range of motion, right? So as soon as he took all that heavy load off, he still had the bar on, the guy dropped way down. Matt's got a great squat. Now, not everybody's going to have this range of motion, even with or without weight, but if you do, this is why I want you to test and see how low can you go with good form without much load. So there are times when you do want to do a partial range like that, and that's specifically when you're intentionally doing partial range of motion so you can overload on the weight. But this wasn't one of those times. He was just looking to do a squat. I think most of you guys out there are just squatting most often. And when you do, you should be getting full range of motion. So here's a little caveat that I have though when you look at his last video, as he dropped way down at the very bottom. Now there wasn't any weight, so he was just kind of getting in there. There was much risk to his back. But the lower you get, as you get to the true end range in your hips, if you go a little bit further, eventually there's not going to be any more room in the hip, and you're going to start going and altering the position of your lumbar spine. This is what you need to be careful of when you're doing a deep squat, because this is the point where people can hurt their back. You want to keep that slight arch in your lumbar spine and keep it stable. You don't want that extra last little bit of motion, especially when you've got heavy load underneath it. That's when people end up pinching a nerve, slipping a disc, because the compressive forces on your disc are now asymmetrical. When you start to round, you're now got all this load pushing down on your spine, and you can start squishing the disc out the back. That's a problem. So, my suggestion to Matt was to start pulling some of the weight off. Strip it back down, do full range of motion, full squat, keeping that arch, everything's nice and tight, and eventually slowly build back up in the weight as you can do it with full range of motion. So that's my comment on the depth. Now, about the knee wiggle, that also is just a lack of stability. It was a really heavy load. He was having a hard time stabilizing it. And as you peel back on the weight, you should be able to get better control. But here's another little trick for keeping your knees nice and stable. Ready? As you're dropping down, think about driving the knees out a bit. Most people aren't squatting too wide. If anything, their knees will start to cave in a little bit. And that's not a good position just for healthy knees. But it's also not a good position for activation of your glutes. So the more you as you start to come down, drive the knees out, you're going to engage your glutes more, which is what's working here, right, in your squat. So you can go nice and low. They'll track better over the middle of your foot. And then, especially as you get ready to drive back up, continue driving those knees out, and they'll stay a lot more stable. That's my biggest two cues for Matt and for most people that I see at the gym out there back squatting. Peel back on the weight, get the depth, and get the control of where your knees are. Your knees, your back, everything will be way happier, and thank you in the future. Now, one other little thing that I should add, it's not applicable to Matt here because he doesn't have any knee pain, but if your reason for not going deeper is because your knees hurt, It's not necessarily that squatting is the problem. You got something going on with your knees, and you need to address that. Now, it could be a bunch of different things. You could have a lack of stability in the muscles around the knee. There might be some torque. Your tibia fibia might be out of alignment in the knee joint and starting to grind down a little bit. You could have really tight quads that are pulling your patella in and kind of jamming it, so that's not allowing you to go deep enough into the squat. You could also have a lack of mobility in your ankles, which doesn't allow you to go forward enough with your knees, because the further back they are, the more you're going to have to, if you can't get your if you can't get your ankles to dorsiflex, and it pushes you back here, your weight goes back there. So now, in order to stay balanced, you either need to lean over, which isn't what you want in a squat, or you're just going to limit your range of motion, and boom, you've got like a quarter squat instead of a full squat. So that's something else to keep in mind. Not so much applicable to Matt right now, but if it feels like it's applicable to you, you need to start looking into either seeing a good chiropractor, getting some tissue work done. There's a lot of different things. That's a whole nother conversation. But I want you to remember, the problem isn't squats. You're supposed to squat. You know, if this was 200 years ago and we didn't have toilets, you'd be squatting every day to go to the bathroom. So squatting is natural. Not being able to squat more than halfway, like to get to a chair, that's not natural. That's not good. That needs to be addressed. And that's my recommendation for you on your back squat. So I'm going to leave it there. I could keep going on and on about squatting, but I'm going to leave it right there. If you've got any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments box. And if you have some issue that you would like a movement audit on, go ahead and film it, load it up, and send me a message, and maybe we'll get you on next. I'm Jamie Dreyer with Overhaul Training. Thank you very much. Show me a little bit of love if you like this video, and hit the like button. Thanks. Ciao.